Welcome to the JonnyDel Football Academy podcast on the channel that's trying to answer the whys and hows of the game by talking through and dissecting game film and diving deeper to explain why the X's zig and the O's zag. I am Adam Marino, joined by Mr. JonnyDel, and we are reminding you, as always, the most fun way to watch is on YouTube, where we go live. There you can comment into the live show. Be sure to hit the notification bell and turn on your notifications so you can be a part of the conversation. We also stream live on Facebook and X. Also, the audio versions are always found on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, if you are live with us in the chat, it's probably because you are subscribed, you've hit the notification bell, and turned those notifications on. So, when sharing with your friends, be sure to let them know. We also love to hear from you outside of our live show. Email us at JonnyDel's@gmail.com, and you can always check out the website jfa49.com, as it is the most fun way to support the channel. Also, the way we boost the chat and boost the algorithm is to type out hashtag JD49.
What is up, Niner faithful? I am so jazzed this morning. Maybe it's the afternoon for you, whatever time it is, wherever you are around the world, whatever time it is in your locale. I have two of the best people in the world with me, John Chapman and WayneBreezie. John, it has been a minute since we've been able to catch up, man. How you doing? How was your draft season? I know you've been diving into the film. How you been?
It's been fun. I'm great. So excited to be with you guys. We got 3 different time zones covered here today with all 3 of us. Like we are spanning the United States. But no, I'm doing great, man. Drafts always fun because you break down all the tape, you try to find these 49ers fits, and then Kyle Shanahan just does his own thing, which is always fun. But we got a couple guys that I think are great fits, and I don't know. It's been fun doing this. I think the Niners got better. Were they value picks or whatever, to consensus? No, but just glad to be here, man.
That's awesome. Wayne, how you been, man? It's been we haven't caught up since the Senior Bowl. How you been?
I'm great. What a great week we had at the Senior Bowl, trying to figure out who was going to fit well with the 49ers. And some of our picks were spot on and some of our picks were spot off, if that makes any sense. But I'm glad to be here, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah. One guy that I didn't see much about at the Senior Bowl, because I showed up Wednesday and he only practiced Tuesday and Wednesday, was Ricky Pearsall. Were you guys surprised? Were you pleasantly surprised? Were you a little remiss, maybe taken aback? How did you feel when you were sitting there draft night and saw the 49ers picked in the first round Ricky Pearsall?
I wasn't shocked by the position. I wasn't shocked by the fit. I did have Ladd McConkey like as a very comparable player and a little bit elevated at on top of Pearsall. But once you do it, and then as soon as Shanahan did his press conference and said, "Who does he remind you of?" And he's like, "Well, he reminds me of me." It makes sense. And whenever you hindsight, it's 2020, but you look back and it's just like, all right, I get it. It's Kyle, and coming off the Super Bowl and why you lost the Super Bowl, getting guys that can get separation against man coverage, it makes sense. So there's a lot of puzzle pieces there. We didn't put them together, at least I didn't, the correct way beforehand.
What did you think, Wayne?
Yeah, I wasn't shocked at the player, but the pick and getting the player did kind of shock me. I'm not going to say that I expected a wide receiver in round 1 when I'm not saying that it wasn't a need, but we had 2 serviceable 1A, 1B wide receivers, and I wasn't sure that they were looking to get like a 1C type of person. But love the player. And I think this player is going to be able to add another element to the 49ers offense. Maybe this is the 5th element, you know what I'm saying? And we'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah. One thing I remember fans being upset about was there was a guy who went just a little bit before the 49ers pick, and I think a lot of people were hoping that we'd trade up to go get him, and that was Tyler Guyton. Now, we were there at the Senior Bowl, and I remember I was sitting next to you, And I was remarking on how tall that dude is. Because, seeing him from the sidelines was like, oh my Lord. Him and Patrick Paul they were like two towers out there, just well above everybody else. And I remember we started talking about him, and I think we both talked about it looked like he wasn't necessarily going to be the best scheme fit for the 49ers, that he was just, his hips were a little bit stiff moving to the second level, that he got a little bit too high when he would try to get to the second level, and some linebackers were getting underneath him. And I looked at it and I thought, this doesn't seem, if you see Trent Williams and Joe Staley as the prototypical Shanahan tackles, and what you saw from Mike McGlinchey and what you see in Colton McKivitz, he did not resemble that at all. It was more like the Trent Brown situation. That's who he reminded me of. Is somebody he anchored extremely well against pass pro, but it was just that ability to get to the second level in the run game just didn't seem to be there. And I felt like once some of the other tackles, like Amarius Mims, went off the board, which I had some question marks about him. I felt like he was the only guy that would be a fit for the 49ers in their range. I think, John, you had put some stuff on X about him, that one of the big concerns was durability, is that he would miss a lot of time. And so once I saw him go off the board, I thought this will be interesting when it gets to the 49ers, because I didn't see any tackle that was there that I thought they were going to trade up for after that point.
And I think, when we look at just who they did draft, everybody 30-plus games started. And so you talk about Amarius Mims with 8, Tyler Guyton 15. Like, they didn't even get to the 50% threshold, if that's what they did, of all these 5th and 6th-year seniors that the Niners got. Like, I'm curious. I would love to just know, did you have them on your board? Were they even on your board?
Yeah.
Because I don't think Mims was, but I think Guyton maybe was. But my question is this, and Wayne, like, I'll pass this one off to you. They never even met with Guyton. So somebody that had so many injury issues, I don't know. Do you think that he was even on their board?
I'm not sure about Guyton, but there is a possibility that Mims was on their board because of the scheme fit. The kid is versatile. He's athletic and he can move, and he kind of like fits what the Niners want to do, especially in the run game. And he's like a mountain out there. But now you said the issue with him was durability, and the reason why I had him as a pick or an option for the 49ers was because I knew that the Niners weren't drafting anybody to play this year. You know what I'm saying? And so can they get him in? They would have been able to get him into the system, get him healthy, get his body right for the NFL, even though he's a big guy, to fit the system. So, Johnny, you may be right. He might have been an option. I think my number one option was like a Talisi Fuaga out of Oregon State, who I thought was versatile. I knew the Niners were going to go versatile for offensive line. John Lynch came out and said it. He said, we're not looking for a tackle, we're looking for an offensive lineman. He said that. I don't know if we were paying attention, but that's what he said. He said, this is what we're looking for. And I thought he was the perfect offensive lineman, a guy that played tackle but could kick in right now and play guard. And so they probably went with their number. I don't know if Puny was their number 2 option, number 3 option. I don't know, because maybe Rosengarten was number 1, Puny was number 2, or Fuaga was number 1. Rosengarten was number 2. Clearly, Rosengarten was probably number 2, number 1, and then he got sniped and went to the Ravens. And the Niners was like, "Yo, we got to jump up and we got to get our offensive lineman in round 3 at pick 86."
Yeah, Puni is an interesting selection there, and I think that's a really interesting point about they're going to pick an offensive lineman. One thing that I've kind of just thought about since this has been over is, okay, I may have wanted them to get a tackle, but maybe does Puni allow them to get a tackle, in the sense that now the money that you were maybe going to have to spend on Aaron Banks, or draft capital that you would have to spend on Aaron Banks, a replacement, that now you have somebody who can play guard or center, or you get a replacement there, and you can take that money and now put it into a right tackle, whether that be a free agent next year, or are you able then to say, well, there's one less free agent we need, we can now put draft capital in trading up and getting another tackle? I just wonder if that's what's there. I feel like they had a small list of tackles that fit their first and second round kind of board, and those guys went away really quick. I think Talisi Fuaga is a perfect example, and he went quick. It was like there was a run on quarterbacks, and then boom, Fuaga's off the board. And then Tanu went off the board pretty quick too. Those are two guys that were, if it was your wish list tackles, those are my wish list tackles. I knew there was no chance a team was going to turn around and let the 49ers get that tackle. They're like, no, you don't let Superman all of a sudden become impervious to kryptonite. Like you gotta make sure that they still have some sort of weakness there. But I really like the Poon he picked. I really like. Again, we saw him at the Senior Bowl, and he was always playing interior offensive line at the Senior Bowl. He played right guard, center, left guard. Those were the vast majority of his snaps, team drills, position drills, everything. And just as somebody who fits what the 49ers love from their offensive linemen. But what I do like is he's a better pass protector than they've sometimes previously brought in. That is the part that starts to get me a little bit excited about him, because yes, McKivitz was cheeks last year, right? Like he gave up a ton of sacks, ton of pressures. He was also facing, I think, a lot stiffer condition than our line was, and we were constantly giving up interior pressure. When the Super Bowl, my God, like that was horrible in the Super Bowl. And to get something that can bring in, and I think is going to push Brendel or Feliciano / Burford, I think he's going to be somebody who's going to be really good there. How did you feel about that pick, John? Did you see that? I remember that pick was coming around, and he had been a guy that I had 3 mock drafts before. I'd done 4, and the last one I did, I was like, I'm not picking Pooney because I've done this in the previous 3 drafts. I got to do something different. But he was a guy every single time the 49ers came around to my mock drafts in round 3, I picked him. Yeah, I felt that strongly, and I felt like the 49ers were going to see him that way. That was the hardest thing sometimes too, right? Is you do these mock drafts, and it's like, okay, I know what I like, but trying to put your mind in the mind of Shanahan and Lynch is a little bit of a challenge sometimes.
It's weird because, like, when we draft these players, it's like, okay, the 49ers, they've been doing this since 2017 with this front office and coaching staff, so we know what they kind of like. And when they picked him, I was like, okay, like, who is he? Like, have we drafted anybody like him? And we really haven't, but the player he's closest to is Banks, like you talked about. And the width, the shoulder width, the waist width, and the anchor ability, I think that's huge. And so
that was my biggest note on him from the Senior Bowl. When I came back with all my notes from the Senior Bowl, I had good anchor written all over him because of how he anchored in pass pro.
Because, like, his footwork's not great, and he was left tackle, but he never got beat. But, like, I'm doing his film, and I'm counting 4 to 5 times he's crossing his feet over in a pass set, and it's just like, what are you doing, man? So, like, he's still got some polish. I get why he dropped where he did with the arm length and all those different things. But, yeah, I'm with you. Guard of the future, and, you've got everybody on the interior that's almost on an expiring contract. And so it's similar to what we did at corner with Renardo Green, where you got all these corners on expiring contracts. And so you go get a guy. You got all these O linemen on expiring contracts. So you go get a guy. It's just this red shirt idea. But I'm hoping, I want to see him in the lineup probably more than almost anybody. Because if he's playing, that means Brendel or McKivitz probably isn't. And that's what I want personally. I think that's why everybody wanted an offensive line being the first round pick, but I like him. We can't see him soon enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's another pick that I liked as well. Definitely mocked him in a couple of mock drafts. Once I realized that he was a meanie. And so I'm all about changing the face front of the 49ers offensive line. And I'm not, as much as I like everybody up there, like, I think we need to get mean. We need to get Trent Williams mean, and everybody's not that mean. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like Trent Williams, and then it's a bunch of choir boys. And so I think, well, maybe John Feliciano has some mean streak in him too, but he's also been in the league for a little bit. But I think Kyle Shanahan wants to utilize him as that savvy veteran floating offensive lineman where I could play you anywhere. And when they drafted Dominic Puny, it was more like, all right, man, we finally got tough up front. As far as a tackle in college, I agree with you. I thought he was a great anchor. Johnny, I didn't think he had a great day one at the Senior Bowl at the tackle position. I felt like he was getting beat a lot. Once they kicked him inside on day 2 and day 3, he was a monster. And all of a sudden, that same person like Gabe Hall from Baylor couldn't get by him. That's a strong kid too out of Baylor. Couldn't get by him. He wasn't giving up the inside or the outside pressure when it came to that. And I think the Niners got them a solid piece for the future. I know everybody says they want to get him in now. I didn't think McKivitz, even though he might have been the weakest link, I didn't think he always had a bad game. I think he overcompensated a lot for that guard position. And I think that to me was the issue more than the right tackle. I think if McKivitz really just focused on playing that tackle position and didn't have to kick in, and you go back to that Super Bowl, and I know we go back to that play where Chris Jones runs free. We all saw that initially it looked like it was on McKivitz, but he actually did his right assignment. And so it's like, dang, he's going to always get the brunt of everything. He's a good pass protector, in my opinion. Not as great in run blocking. I feel like you're going to get the same with Puny, but Puny is not a bad run blocker. I watched that Illinois game in film. Excuse me. I watched the film, and I saw him kick out, and I saw a bunch of big, explosive run plays to the left side. I also saw them change of direction plays where they start left and end right, and his big behind was over to the right. So I think they got an athletic guy, a versatile guy, and that's what the Niners want. And we have to next year. We need the first thing we need to think of, John and Johnny. Versatility. I don't know why we go away from versatility when we know that's all they want is versatile players.
And I'll add this on that Illinois game about Dominic Puny. He was asked at the combine, what game signifies who you are as a player, and he said that Illinois tape.
I didn't even.
He said, "Watch the Illinois tape,
bro.
Like, that's
that was his best tape, hands down."
So you talked about the athleticism too. Short shuttle, 98th percentile. 3-cone was like 94th percentile.
Yeah,
I mean that like those elements that are so important for the 49ers for playing guard and center in spades.
His
and
10-yard split was like a 187 too, so that's not bad.
Yeah, really great 10-yard split. And one thing that drove me nuts watching last year, and I saw this in streaks the year before, was how many runs we had that were this close to breaking explosive runs. And it was like if Brendel got his guy, if he got to the second level and got that linebacker, just got a piece of him, that it would have been, I mean, you're talking gone. These 70-yard touchdown runs that were so stinking close. And it's just the backside guy gets past Brendel and just gets in the hole and makes the tackle. I mean, there's so many runs like that last year. I'm going, if we can get somebody in there, either at center or guard, that we can start getting to the second level on these stretch zones that are the bread and butter of our offense. I mean, when you really look back to the history of Kyle Shanahan and the history of these drafts and everything, he's building around this scheme that's what you need so bad. And so that's what I love about Puny and where he is. So I that's the pick I'm most excited about. I think Pearsall and Green will definitely add elements. I'm not sure that they're going to be the big push you over the top elements this year. I think if Puny can be and elevate to who we think he can be, then the 49ers are much better this year than they were the year before. But it was just a fascinating draft this time. I think all around, I think everybody was, as much of a head scratcher as maybe Pearsall was for a lot of people. It wasn't near the head scratcher that the Falcons pulled. And I mean, that had everybody just going.
That shocked the nation,
what?
Man.
Yeah, it was meme worthy. That's what it was. It was totally GIF and meme worthy, like, of what was going on there. But it'll be interesting to see how history looks back on what the Falcons did there, because so many of these drafts, moments maybe head scratches at the time, and then they turn out. And so there's other times that it seems like a team has completely knocked it out of the park, and when you go back and look at it, you realize maybe not so much. And I think what I've gotten into, especially this season, we did a series on my channel before leading up to the draft, where we went back and looked at top 5 first-round picks of all time for the 49ers, bottom 5 first-round picks of all time. And then like honorable mentions in there for different things for both sides. We did with second round, third round, 4th and 5th round, and then we did late round picks. And what was fascinating to me, the hardest list to put together for me was actually the 3rd round. That was the hardest list. Now, number 1 was easy. It was Joe Montana, right? But who was going to be number 2, 3, 4, 5 was so tough. I mean, you're talking Dwight Clark, Frank Gore,
Bowman,
Navarro Bowman, Fred Warner. There was it was Bob. He's in the Hall of Fame, Ring of Honor. Bob St. Clair was in there. Man, it was tough. Roger Craig was there. Tom Rathman was there. So it was so interesting. Again, also looking at the bus of 1, 2, and 3, and thinking about these were guys that we were so excited about, most of us, coming out, and didn't work out. And some of these guys that were massive hits, nobody was excited about, and then they turned into who they were. So it was just fascinating of forcing me into this perspective of, it really does take some time to understand, is a draft good or not? And I think as we sit here after the 2024 draft, we can start looking back on several of these drafts and saying, how did we actually do? And what is Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch's track record in the draft? Let's give an honest assessment of what can we trust them in the draft? Because I think every draft we come out of it, and the argument is, do you trust them or not? Because there's always going to be picks that don't make sense to us, or you did not see coming, and we go. And there's always this argument on social media, right? Trust the process. No, they haven't earned the trust. Okay. So I think it's interesting to look back and say, okay, what has been their track record? Let's actually look at this and really think about it. So we're gonna jump back here. We're gonna start out with the very first draft of the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan. Yeah. 2017 draft. So It started out with a bang. They traded back from the number 2 spot to the number 3 spot, and they drafted Solomon Thomas out of Stanford. Pick number 3, round 1. Then they traded back into the first round at the end, and out of Alabama picked Reuben Foster, linebacker. Then in round 3, they ended up picking C.J. Beathard out of Iowa. Right before that, they picked Ahkello Witherspoon. So pick number 66 in the round 3, they picked Ahkello Witherspoon, cornerback out of Colorado. Then they picked C.J. Beathard out of Iowa. In the 4th round, they went Joe Williams, running back out of Utah. 5th round, George Kittle, tight end out of Iowa. 5th round, Trent Taylor, wide receiver. 6th round, DJ Jones, defensive tackle out of Ole Miss. 6th round, Pita Taumapenu from Utah, the one that always drove all of us nuts in trying to pronounce his name. And then in round 7, Adrian Colbert, safety out of Miami. So that's who the 49ers picked that year. What do you guys remember what your initial thoughts were on their draft performance that year?
Oh, I couldn't stop watching Reuben Foster highlights. I couldn't do it. It was just Reuben Foster hard hits. That's the linebacker of the future. We're going to get all that. It's funny you talked about the trade back from number 2 to 3. That gave us the 3rd round pick to get Fred Warner. So we were right about the linebacker, just wrong about the player. But I thought it was a home run. Everybody liked Solomon Thomas. Just didn't work out. I was pumped because that's when I started doing the show too. I started doing 49ers Rush right before this draft. And so I came along with the Shanahan stuff. So
interesting.
I was pretty pumped about it, but it's not a great draft at all. It's actually pretty bad.
I agree with John, 100%. I think Reuben Foster, you knew about him. He was out of Alabama. You knew who Alabama was, and they had all the
he was a human highlight reel in college.
I'm trying to tell you. So when John traded back up to get him, regardless of the red flags, because there were red flags at the combine, but not one of us gave 2 flying cares about his red flag because we knew he was taking somebody's head off if he was on somebody's team. We drafted him. I think that was the only pick that mattered. I didn't know anything about George Kittle. I didn't know anything about any of these other players. I'm just going to keep it a buck. The only player I knew about was Reuben Foster. I liked what I liked what am I trying? I liked the process that they used in 2017. They decided to address the trenches on the defensive side. Their mentality was we build the defense, we keep these games close, and we kind of supplement on the offense. We get enough points to win by, but our defense is going to hold us down. You guys got to remember the context of their first season. I know none of us care about the context, but listen, they were first-time GM, first-time head coach, and they had plenty of money, all right, because they also had a great free agency, I guess you can say. It's the same year. We got some of those players. But in the draft, I thought they came in and they addressed the draft the way most teams would. But looking back on hindsight, man, they messed out on some prominent players in the league right now. But again, they decided to go with the trenches. And, when you compare it to this year's draft, it's totally different, right? Because, like, you would have thought the first pick would have been a trench pick, and it clearly wasn't. And so I can tell that the team is learning, and they have a system. They have a system built, and now it's all about getting the right fits. I think that's what it comes down to. You ever go out to I put it like this. We all wear suits from time to time, right? But we might go to a Macy's and grab a suit off the rack. You know what I'm saying? But the Niners, that's how they used to draft. Now the Niners are going to the tailor and getting their suits fit for the body. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of like what they doing with their offense and defense. So, that 2017 draft, even though it was crap, we got a gem or two, maybe a gem out of that.
And I think it's interesting because when you look at their draft strategy, there's a big shift after 2021, which I think it's the post Trey Lance draft strategy, which is they stop going for 1-year wonder guys who show huge upside, and they say we want players with experience who play the position well. That matters more to us than the potential and 1-year wonder in college kind of guys. Because Solomon Thomas was that guy. He had only one really good year there at Stanford, and that was even blown up by the North Carolina game. I remember they played North Carolina that year, and he had 5 sacks, something like that. And he was the number 1 ranked run defender coming out of college as far as defensive lineman. And if you remember, again, Wayne, I love that you bring up context because the 2016 49ers were the worst run defense in the league by a mile. If we remember, that team had allowed a 100-yard rusher in 15 out of 16 games. We had guys like Michael Wilhoit playing linebacker, and our defensive line was garbage. Eric Armstead couldn't stay healthy. Eric Armstead had not had a healthy season by that point. DeForest Buckner was the only good quality guy on the line. We had Cassius Marsh as our number 1
dude was doing
guy.
roundhouse kicks.
Right.
After
He's doing roundhouse kicks only
one
6
does
times
not
a year.
simply beat out Cassius Marsh.
No,
That's all I'm saying.
And so what they did, they went and said, let's get the best run defender we can find in the draft. Everyone thought it was about Solomon Thomas in the pass rush production. They were saying we're going to shore up the run because that's where football starts. This was the worst run defense team in the league, and they had Navarro Bowman coming back. They went and signed Malcolm Smith, who knew the system they were bringing in from Seattle. Had played there, was former Super Bowl MVP, and then they drafted Reuben Foster, who was a prototypical will linebacker in this position in this scheme. That's Dre Greenlaw now, right? So he was a human highlight reel, insane speed. And I remember coming out of this draft, I was like, we're going to the bowl next year. I was so high on this draft. I thought Akella Witherspoon was going to come in and be an absolute stud. Solomon Thomas is going to be a dominant factor on the defensive line. I thought Reuben Foster they essentially, in my opinion, I was coming out of this draft saying they came away with 2 top 10 players out of this draft. That's how I was feeling about it. And then the rest of the draft, I was like, they got this kind of blocking tight end out of Iowa. He'll be all right, maybe. And he turns out to be the best of the bunch. If we go back, Mel Kiper from ESPN gave the 49ers an A- for this draft. So again, when we look at some national narratives on this, he said, overall, the 49ers did well not to just settle for picking good players and make a player for adding a second elite or Overall, the 49ers did well to not just settle for picking good players and make a play for adding a second elite player. Reuben Foster carries some risk, but at number 31, bring it on. This is a good start to the Lynch era. It was Peter Briscoe from CBS Sports gave them an A. Char Reuter from NFL.com gave him a B. That's an interesting one.
Ooh, he was the most right. He was the most
Doug
correct.
Farrar from Bleacher Report, A-. Chris Burke, Sports Illustrated, A-. Dieter Kurtenbach, Fox Sports, A-. Nate Davis, USA Today, A. Dan Kadar, SB Nation, B-. Luke Easterling from DraftWire was a B-.
That's the closest.
And so
that draft was a D motherfucking plus.
Yeah.
Let me tell you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a D plus. I will say Luke Easterling, the biggest reason he gave this a B- was because he hated the late round picks. And he loved the Reuben Foster. That's the only reason it was above a C.
That's our take, John. That's our take.
Yeah.
It was Reuben Foster and nothing else. I'm sorry, George Kittle.
Yeah.
You're the best player out of this draft, but I'm telling you, it was about Reuben Foster that year.
It was.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. Like, if we look back on that draft, everybody said it was almost everybody A-. It's a D plus. Like, that was a bad draft.
You know my issue though with Solomon Thomas
was a good player.
He turned out because he started off unhealthy as well. Like, remember, he couldn't stay healthy at the beginning of his career. I think my issue with Solomon was I felt like they didn't know how they wanted to use him. It was like they drafted him to do what you said, but then they were moving him inside, and then they were moving him back outside. And then he was going up and weight, down and weight, up and weight, down and weight. Like, what? Like, it was almost like, oh my gosh, which one do you want me to do? And then I realized that the Niners were looking, I didn't know that then, but now I know, they were looking for this versatile piece. It's kind of like while I was high on a Rook or Row or Brandon Dorless. I want to make sure I say their names right. As far as interior and exterior, I felt like they would give some type of versatility. So we didn't draft any defensive linemen in this particular draft, but that's what I was thinking they were going to go that route if they were going to go edge interior, even though I wanted Johnny Newton. He was standing us right in the face. But that draft was terrible. Next draft, 2018, I think
that was a different draft. Yeah,
I think we started to understand what we were doing. I think they started to understand what they were doing.
Well, and what's also interesting about that draft, I think if you even grade that draft 2018, you're still probably at an A, because Reuben Foster had not gotten himself off the team yet.
Good point.
And we're sitting there going, if he's got to get his stuff figured out, he's blue chip talent. Solomon Thomas was a little raw. We saw some flashes. We think he can be really good. And I remember at the end of that year, Adrian Colbert came in, and he was going to be the starter. He had some big flashes in games.
I like Colbert.
It was looking like he was going to be a starter.
Yes.
I was sold. Like, I remember the last 4 games of that year when Jimmy had come over, like, I thought he was the safety for the 49ers. Like, he just the flashes that were there. DJ Jones had shown a little bit. George Kittle had dealt with some drops, but you know what? He started to show at the end of the year that he could really be a force. That's why the 49ers, because of some of those players, had some flashes their first year. They were a hot pick to be a playoff team. The next year, they got Jimmy, and they had all these young guys who had shown some flashes, and almost all of them bombed. I remember Akella Witherspoon. He's going to be a guy next year. Remember the offseason, they signed Richard Sherman, and he was coming over and saying, Akella Witherspoon's a dog. He's going to be one of the best players in this league, and we're all believing. And just to see how that list turned out is really fascinating. So let's move on to the 2018 draft. This one had a lot more picks, but this one was a bit of a mixed bag. So we had in round 1, pick 9 was Mike McGlinchey, tackle at Notre Dame. In round 2 at pick 44, picked only 20 spots later than Brandon Ayuk would end up getting picked a couple years down the road, is Dante Pettis. Round 3,
I love
Fred
so much, man. That was like my favorite pick. Just never worked out.
He was very productive, and he was versatile at Washington. Yeah. He was a big time return kid. Showed all the route running talent in the world at Washington. But then in round 3, they picked Fred Warner. Later in round 3, defensive back out of Southern Miss, who had all the athletic talent in the world.
He had the build
Tarvarius
too,
Moore.
Man.
Then round 4, Kentavious Street out of North Carolina.
Strong kid.
Round 5, DJ Reed out of Kansas State. Round 6, Marcel Harris, almost a linebacker, safety. Round 7, Julian Taylor, defensive tackle. And round 7, wide receiver Richie James.
The great Richie James.
How did you guys feel about that draft coming away?
I liked it. I thought it was awesome, but it was weird with the McGlinchey thing. Nobody saw that coming. We had Trent Brown. They said, "Oh, Trent Brown's part of this team. We still like him." Then they traded him like 2 hours later. But yeah, the Pettis one I thought was a home run. I was right down in front of the stage. That was in Dallas, and so I was maybe 10 rows from the stage when they announced that pick and the trade up. I was going bananas because he was my number 1 wide receiver in that draft, which. Clearly, I was way off. And so was Kyle, sadly. But it just wasn't great. It wasn't great. And we thought, the Raiders, they wanted McGlinchey, but we took him. And then the Raiders fell back and got Colton Miller, who was terrible his first 2 years. McGlinchey's best 2 years were his first 2 years, and then he got worse and worse and worse. And now Colton Miller's like a franchise left tackle. And so, after 2 years, we're like, oh, we fleeced them. Ha, 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 ha. Now it's like, golly, they traded back in, got the better player. Man, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. The first round, you want to talk about head scratcher? Out of all the offensive linemen that you heard of coming out of college, I did not expect the 49ers to draft Mike McGlinchey. And I think from that moment on, I was disinterested or not interested in the draft. I was just like, I'm done. And so when they drafted Dante,
him so bad he shut down.
Bro, I shut all the way down. Because again, this was kind of before I really started getting into scouting players and all that type of stuff. So I knew who was supposed to go in the first round, and he wasn't supposed to go in the first round. Okay, so I knew the top picks, and I thought that the Niners, they drafted at pick 9. I thought they were going to have a good selection there. They could have went any position they wanted. They went to the trenches, which is what I thought they would do. I just didn't think he was the player. John talked highly of Dante Pettis. When you started watching his highlights, you were like, oh, they got them a weapon. Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't know Kyle Shanahan had this level of dog for wide receiver. I didn't know you had to be a certain type of dog. And it was because you had to block. I didn't know that, right? You had to be able to block. You had to be able to do the dirty work. And I just don't think Dante Pettis had it in him, and he just didn't pan out. Now, we can say, looking back at this draft, that the top 2 players from this draft for the 49ers were Fred Warner and DJ Reed. You can throw in Mike McGlinchey there if you want, because he did play decent enough for the 49ers. I mean, when we ran the ball, he was a force. When we passed the ball, he was not a force. He needed the force. So I thought DJ Reed was a stud, and we just unfortunately couldn't afford him. Or did we trade him? I think we traded him. But
DJ Reed, we let him walk.
We let him walk in free agency. That's what I thought.
And then Saleh pulled him over to the Jets.
No. DJ Reed, the corner? No, that's the one we tried stashing on IR.
He got hurt.
Yeah.
And then they picked him up.
And they picked him up whenever we thought we were just going to stash him for the year. And Seattle picked him up.
That's when I remember.
Seattle, and then he came back and played against us.
That's when I remember Kyle Shanahan beyond the shenanigans. Yes.
Yeah,
that's
he
when I
emerged
realized Kyle was a genius.
What the?
Yeah. And so I'm starting to understand Kyle a little bit more. He be trying to hold on to some of these players, literally, and that practice squad, he's going to utilize that. So I'm like, okay, we do got a genius as a head coach. The only thing is he got to remember that the other teams are watching. You know what I'm saying? But then again, you look back at this draft, I thought the issue with Tarvarius Moore it wasn't his athleticism, it was his cognitive ability. I thought he was just dumb. I didn't think he can play other than dime. He couldn't play safety. He didn't know how to play what they wanted out of a safety. You had to be able to play free, and you had to be able to play in a box. He was dope when he came in as a dime backer, and he came in and he had one piece of field to cover. You couldn't throw him. He knew his assignment. But when he had to know multiple assignments and multiple responsibilities, that's where he struggled. And unfortunately, that's why he's not here. Kentavious
Yeah.
Street was just too damn. He was strong, but that was it. Other than that, he couldn't do anything.
He was so stiff. The thing that I remember exciting me so much about Tarvarius Moore, dude ran like a 4.32 40. I mean,
Back to back at his pro day.
Damn.
4.32. I mean,
yeah.
So this is before
Like,
I got into all this draft stuff. Wow.
Yeah, he ran a blazing fast 40. He was a safety, and they were looking at converting him to corner.
Wasted.
And so he's
see what I'm saying?
So he spent his first year playing corner, and then they moved him to safety.
So it's not his fault. That's what you're saying.
Well,
I got you.
He had a penchant for taking really bad angles. What's fascinating about the Mustafa pick this year is it's like the 49ers have gotten to a point they've said, we have seen this play out enough. Okay, we got Moore. He took really bad angles. We got Hufanga. What's been his
bad angles
problem,
too. I
takes
don't care
bad
what you
angles.
say. Yes.
We have Jair Brown. What's the one knock on Jair Brown?
Bad
He takes
angles.
Bad angles. We have seen this hurt us so many times. What is the thing that you don't see from Mustafa?
He takes good
Dude
angles.
takes incredible angles, and he's an incredible tackler.
Mm-hmm.
The 49ers finally saw teams just start cooking him with these crack tosses at the end of the year last year and said, no more. This is not happening again. We are getting a good angle taking safety who can tackle when he gets there. Like the rest of it, be darned. And that really started with Tarvarius Moore. And I remember it was I think it was against the Steelers in 2018.
It started with two players in this draft.
Akello was one of them too.
Nah, it started. Marcel Harris was the worst angle tackler person I've ever seen in my life, and then Tarvarius Moore was number 2.
I do remember, like, there was a game. It was against the Steelers. I think it was 2018. It's the famous game where Juszczyk like tossed Minkah Fitzpatrick. I want to say,
yes.
Maybe it was that game. No, that was 2019. That Tarvarius Moore was playing safety because I think Jimmy Ward was hurt, and I can't remember who the receiver was. He hit his little slant. Moore completely whiffed on the tackle, and he had like 70-some yard touchdown catch. I don't know why I remember that one, but it was from Tarvarius Moore.
You know why you remember that one. You know exactly why.
Because it hurts.
That was too many
remember
yards.
The pain.
Yeah.
Way too many. I think if I look back on this draft to say, they really did nail 2 really top tier starters, and I just have to take a moment out of our day to give a big thank you for Zach Shrout with them coming in with a big super chat.
That's what we
and
like.
He says he loves the Malik Mustafa pick. I love picking any player with the name Mustafa. It's got to be a lion on the field.
I have one issue with Malik. Sorry, one issue. And I saw it at the Senior Bowl numerous times, and it was when they forced him to get into like single coverage, and he had to cover. And
he is not good in man coverage.
Thank you. I just thought it was me, and I'm not saying it's super bad, but I'm glad you confirmed it, because when I say why I gave him a B opposed to an A grade, they're going to force him to be in man coverage. Now the Niners got to figure that part out, and that's the only knock. Other than that, the kid is a monster. Great tackler. And how many missed tackles we average per game? 14? Like, some was high.
It was way too high last year.
It was double
way
digits.
too high.
Double
it
digits.
was ridiculous.
I just thank you for confirming that, though, because I saw him live there, and that is kind of what made me, I'm not saying move off from him, but I'm like, he's got to work on that. But other than that, they couldn't run on him. And if he was on the coverage, he made the tackle. And he reminded me of how physical, and we didn't talk much about Renardo Green, but how physical Darrell Luter Jr. was last year at the Senior Bowl, and they couldn't throw on him. Remember, Johnny? They couldn't throw on Darrell Luter Jr. Now, he had a couple penalties, but it didn't matter. Like, you wasn't going to complete a pass on him. And I think that the physicality of the secondary that we're not talking about much is the difference. I think they're going to get super physical, and good luck. They'll take a flag or two here or there, but they're going to be super physical, and they're focusing on not interceptions. They feel like those will come. Those are gimmies. But they're focusing on you not completing the pass. And this kid, Malik Mustafa, is going to knock somebody's head off. It's like old school safety. It's a JonLynch pick, hands down.
Yeah, and John, you can kind of add to this as well. the 49ers have had a serious problem with tackling from their safeties for a number of years. And it feels like to me they've said we are going to address this. This is not going to be an issue next year. You've done some film work on Mustafa. What is the number one thing that sticks out to you and how he fits against the 49ers need there?
The 49ers love the two safety approach where they have the hair on fire guy, that's, Hufunga, and they have the shell guy that's always over the top, the eraser role. Like, don't let big plays turn into bigger plays. My favorite thing about Mustafa is he can do both. He really, really can. Now, he's at his best whenever you tell him just go kill somebody. Like, that's what he does. His tackling's unbelievable. But it's funny because the more tape I've gone through, I think I've done 3 or 4 of them. And it's like, man, the more I watch it, like his role changes. This dude's a chameleon where they'll go in Wake Forest. They literally change his role on a per game basis. So like if you're going to watch Malik tape, just watch 1 quarter of several different games instead of a full game because he's playing all over the place. And so sometimes they'll put him on the tight end. Like, look, dude, they got a playmaking tight end. Just stick with him. But sometimes he'll be free. Sometimes he'll be in the box. Sometimes he's an extra linebacker in the goal line. Like, he just fits. And, Wayne said earlier, versatility, that's huge. And this dude is a cultural fit to a T. He loves football. And you guys watch film. When you get a person's personality come off the all 22 silent tape, it's incredible. It's like he's talking to you, and you can see him celebrating for his team. Nothing makes him happier than when a teammate makes a play. I mean, he goes ecstatic. He'll make a huge play. He'll stand up. He'll turn around and walk right back to his spot. All business. Teammate makes a play. That dude's jumping up and down celebrating. And so it's such a clean pick. I love it. I see Call It in the chat. He says, Malik grew up a Niners fan in a Cowboys household. What's up, man? Birds of a feather.
So did I.
I love that.
Go figure, right?
I love that. If we go back to the 2008 draft, NFL.com gave the 49ers a B. They said, and this is what's interesting. Again, what people say about certain prospects at the time. Warner is a solid linebacker worthy of a 3rd-round pick. He'll shore things up at whatever spot the team requires at the 2nd level. That was what they felt about Fred Warner. Bleacher Report gave him a B. They say wide receiver Dante Pettis and linebacker Fred Warner are good players with high floors. They should help this team immediately. Not necessarily high ceiling players. That's interesting. Sporting news, B-. McGlinchey, Pettis, and Warner were good ways to open John Lynch's 2nd draft. Then USA Today, C+. C+. That's interesting. They say Mike McGlinchey wasn't a top 10 talent, but it's hard to blame the 49ers for taking the most polished, experienced tackle in this draft to protect their investment in Jimmy Garoppolo. The value, athleticism, and potential they get in the following rounds is what has me excited. From a big play machine and Dante Pettis to high upside underrated defenders and Fred Warner and Tarvarius Moore, day 3 brought more of the same with tons of potential and quality depth on both sides of the ball. Their last pick, Richie James, might have me excited the most. That's what USA James did.
And so, okay, look, they came out of this draft with 2 good players. Sadly, because of roster moves, you lost one of them. And so you got 1 good player. That's it. Mike McGlinchey, I don't consider him a bust. I'm not trying to backtrack here,
right.
But you look at this, it's a bad draft. Now, if you look at the entire, so Pro Football Reference does this draft value, weighted value, whatever, which I love. And so you can sort it on PFR. And if you sort this entire draft class, not the 49ers, all 260 plus picks, okay? The number 1 most valuable pick, Lamar Jackson. Number 2, Josh Allen. Number 3, Fred Warner. You got him. And so this is why, 2017 sucked, 2018 sucked. But that trade back for Solomon Thomas from 2 to 3 got you
Fred
Warner. And so if we're just looking at 2017 to the players, it sucks. But you got to kind of skew it a little bit because of the trade, I think.
Yeah, you get a generational talent in a Fred Warner. I think, that should immediately push you at least to a B range. You can whiff on everybody else. So for me, I would give him a solid B because I'd say, what? They did get a starter who they went to the Super Bowl with. They went to an NFC Championship game with, who went and got paid a big bag of money in free agency. in Mike McGlinchey. I think, well, also we forget looking around the league. There's not a lot of good right tackles out there. There's a lot of right tackles that have come out over the last 5, 6, 7 years that have been worse than Mike McGlinchey. And, so was he the best pick? No. It was number 9. I think that's where it's hard is, okay, he was number 9th overall pick, but what value did they get? I would say Mike McGlinchey was probably an early second round value when you look at his career. I think if you were to spend an early second round and get Mike McGlinchey again, you would probably do it. I think most teams would do that. Fred Warner, though, it was such a knockout of the park. George Kittle was such a knockout of the park. It's kind of like a team that they don't have any other run production all game long in baseball, and then some guy comes in and hits a grand slam.
And look, I want to ask this question. Is it worth it for this draft if you're coming away with one all-pro player that you're guaranteed is going to get a second contract? Is that a successful draft?
Absolutely.
Look at this team. They've done it.
Do you know how hard it is, though, to continue to produce those type of players on a stacked roster? And I think that's why I was saying earlier, like, it's first of all, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard to make this team. Number one. Number two, like they drafted really good players that they can get the most out of in this system. So the Niners weren't looking to get best player available. They were looking to get the best player available that fit their system. So if you go starting, I feel like starting in 2019 was the last year where they just said we can get this best player, and that after that we should be pretty much built. We got the offense, we got the defense now, we got the best player on defense, and now we can start really like just kind of like churning in these type of players that fit the system. And so, because when we get to 2019, that may be the best draft that we had in 2019. So I think the Niners, they're just doing a damn good job when it comes to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and the other guys that work in the front office to get the players, to get the best out of these players. And I think you just got to take in mind, I keep trying to put this out there that it's not about right now. The Niners are ready to go now. This is about next year and the year after that. And that's how they're going to continue to draft.
Yeah, and what's really interesting too is how you can weather through 2 drafts where you miss almost everybody. You whiff on almost everybody, and then if you have a 2019 draft and you've got good additions through other pieces, you go and trade for a quarterback, you go and trade for a D Ford, and you had a few pieces there before of how much that can open up, suddenly just burst your window wide open, because we're going to look at this 2019 draft. And this is, my goodness, what a draft. So round 1, pick 2, the moment when the Cardinals at number 1 overall picked Kyler Murray, the 49ers fans almost celebrated louder at the draft that year than the Cardinals, because they knew what that meant. Because there was that, we're about 90% certain that the Cardinals are going to take Kyler Murray, but there's that 10% chance that they're going to take the guy that we need so badly, because Solomon Thomas has not worked out. He had not worked out at defensive end. We were not getting sack production there. And they had traded for D Ford, and now we were going to pair him with Nicholas John Bosa out of Ohio State.
You remember people wanting Quinnen Williams? Y'all remember that debate?
I remember that.
Yes. Yeah. Quinnen Williams has been an absolute baller, ridiculous monster. He took a little bit longer. He was a young kid. I remember it hitting me, seeing him in the draft room that year, backstage at the draft, and he would smile and those braces were there, and I'm like, he looks like he's a 15-year-old kid, of realizing how young he was, but he was in a grown man's body.
I remember he sneezed and blessed himself, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I don't know if you haven't seen that clip, just type in Quinnen Williams sneeze. It's like the funniest 10-second clip ever.
Then in round 2, pick number 36. So only 8 spots ahead of where Dante Pettis was. So when people say, maybe we're being a little hard on missing on Dante Pettis, he was he was picked only 8 spots behind where Deebo Samuel ended up getting picked. And that was a great draft for wide receivers. I mean, the wide receiver talent out of that draft was ridiculous.
They all got paid.
Yeah. Round 2, pick number 36, Deebo Samuel out of South Carolina. Round 3, picked 31 spots later at the end of the 3rd round. They traded back in to get this guy, and it hurts just talking about it, was Jalen Hurd.
I had Hurd ranked ahead of Deebo, and I got to quit telling everybody that. I was so high on Hurd. Like, I will discredit myself all the time. Like, it was what it is. I thought, and it's not that I was low on Deebo. I had Deebo ranked as like my 40th player, right? And he went 36. So like I had him ranked where he should have went. But I had Hurd really high. He was like one of my first 2nd round grades that year. I love that dude, but never worked.
Man. Yeah, Deebo, and then Jalen Hurd. Jalen Hurd was one that was so fascinating. So Nick Wagner from ESPN had written on Jalen Hurd. He said Niner fans have been clamoring for a big wide receiver for a while now, and Hurd undoubtedly fits the bill. It's 6'5", 226 pounds.
The last big wide receiver.
But Coach Kyle Shanahan didn't draft Hurd simply because of his size. To play wideout for Shanahan, you must have separation skills, and the Niners clearly believe Hurd has the potential to do that consistently. The Niners are also intrigued by Hurd's versatility and view him as someone who could even play tight end in certain matchups. Hurd has had some injury issues, with a pair of shoulder problems, a knee ailment, and a concussion. He's also pretty raw as a receiver after spending time playing running back at Tennessee before transferring to Baylor. In drafting Hurd and Samuel on day 2, the Niners followed through on their desire to bolster the receiving core. There's room for both Samuel and Hurd to contribute right away, but Hurd will likely take longer to find his footing. Interesting analysis on that. I haven't always been agreed with Nick Wagner on a lot of things. I think that's a pretty fair assessment of that pick. Round 4 was one that again started some of the head scratchers on 49ers special teams picks, because he spent a 4th round pick on Mitch Wishnowski from punter from Utah. So what did you think, Wayne, when the 49ers they were coming off a year where they were the hot Super Bowl or hot playoff team pick? Jimmy G tears his ACL. They have that horrible season. They lose like 10 games in a row. It was just horrible. There was CJ Beathard, and in the 4th round, they go and get the punter out of Utah, Mitch Wishnowski. What did you think, Wayne?
Listen, I special teams players are players too. I just want to put that out there first and foremost. Okay. And they have significant roles on this roster because field position is everything for Kyle Shanahan. Didn't recognize that in 2019. This was my first live on the air draft coverage ever with nothing but Niners. And I think it was a bunch of these. Because I didn't understand. That didn't make any sense to me. Now, looking at it in hindsight, you're like, okay, we probably got a top punter in the league. But then it was just like, what the freak? What were we doing? Now, we saw some explosiveness out of Mitch Wishnowski. He was able to tackle. He was able to do a couple of things that most punters can't do in the NFL, and they kind of took that job away from him too. They told him don't be making any more tackles. But when that pick came across the screen, I don't think anybody knew it was coming. It's probably just as how John felt last year when they drafted Jake Moody. You think John had the same reaction, and I get it. I get it. I totally get it. The value there. But you know what's funny? As soon as we drafted Mitch, I swear the Patriots drafted the punter. Like right after, and they were still hot then. The Patriots were still the talk of the town.
So they still had Brady,
and they still have. So it's so funny that we kind of kicked the tread on the punter. And John, I know you didn't like the Jake Moody pick, and I get it, but the same thing happened again. Like in that draft.
Oh, they just drafted another kicker too. So like, no, I'm serious. They drafted a replacement kicker for the guy that they drafted last year.
That's crazy.
Already. It lasted 1 year.
It lasted 1 year.
And so it does tell you how light the kicker class was last year, that the 49ers really did say it was going to be Moody or no one else, and they needed to shore up that kicker position. I mean, it's like it's again
I
something
cannot
that
justify this pick. I can't.
In hindsight, I can give it a little leeway.
You got XFL dudes kicking 60-yard field goals on the regular out there, just chilling.
They might not be able to do it in the NFL though.
Stadiums that only got like 18 people in them. There's no pressure.
I was going to say they may not be able to do it in the NFL though.
My ass.
Okay.
My ass.
Okay. Okay. All right. I got you.
Now, I root for the kid. I just cannot justify that there. And I saw even with Mitch, somebody said like Mitch is good now. He is. He had a bad first 2 years.
Yes, he
like
did.
He was not good. He was bad.
I didn't
now
think
he's good.
You know what it was, John? I don't think he understood the assignment. I don't think he understood what they were asking him to do, and then he figured it out. Oh, my job is to, because remember, a lot of his stuff was directional. He was trying to put the certain type of spin on the ball so it could kind of bounce back this way, like opposed to going out of the end zone. Like,
oh, he's great now.
He's gotten really good. He's gotten his technique down pat. But I don't give nobody says this pick didn't make any sense.
Yeah. Sorry
I think,
for the everybody.
It's one of those moments where you're expecting some more juice, right? You're expecting like a difference maker, and you feel like usually a punter or kicker is a tread water type of pick at best, especially where the 49ers were. He's like,
but isn't that why you saved them till round 6, 7?
Right, because you're not getting better with him. You're just kind of keeping yourself from getting worse is the idea.
Right.
So, I think that's where it's hard, and especially hard with a punter. Like because really every NFL fan is like, this is the guy we never want to see on the field. If we're doing things right, we should never see this guy. So why are you spending a 4th round pick on him? You're an offensive coach. You shouldn't be punting the ball. Like that's where we feel with it.
John and Johnny, do you think Dre Greenlaw felt some type of way going 5th?
It matters. It matters.
Talk about this, so John's
dude. You're telling me like
you drafted a punter over me. You chose that mother trucker over me. I guarantee. That's why Dre. I'm glad they did that because Dre Greenlaw been playing with fire ever since. Like that's why he plays the way he plays because they chose Mitch in front of him. I bet you.
Oh, I'm still mad.
Which does lead us into round 5 in that year, 148th overall pick, which came from a trade with the Broncos. So they picked Dre Greenlaw out of Arkansas, which again is a fascinating pick because wasn't it the year before they let Navarro Bowman had tore his Achilles.
Yes.
And then he was coming back and they released him in 2018. Right, he asked for a release, and we were all sitting there going, "Why don't you at least trade him?" You can get value for Navarro. And they said we respect him too much as the veteran he is, and they released Navarro Bowman. They had signed Quan Alexander during the offseason, who was supposed to be the replacement for Reuben Foster. So linebacker was supposed to be set. You had Quan Alexander, the $14 million a year guy, and you had Fred Warner, who had emerged the year before. And we're moving on from Navarro Bowman. We're moving on from Malcolm Smith, who had been the big free agent signing before that. And so it was like Dre Greenlaw, I guess they can get a third linebacker. And then Quan Alexander got hurt. Yeah. And we suddenly saw this kid who had created some buzz in the preseason and everything, Dre Greenlaw, step in and became one of the best linebackers in the league. Then round 6 was Caden Smith, tight end. Round 6.
Wait, don't leave off of Caden Smith because that was the pick Kyle thought he could stash, and he got picked up by the Giants. So
he's still in the league.
That was the stash pick. That was our DJ Reed of 2019.
Yeah, and Justin School was right tackle who they picked. He was horrible in pass protection. But we did win some games with him. Still in the league. Tim Harris was cornerback they picked then late in there. To me, the end of they picked guys that, like you said, are still in the league. Like there was no massive whiffs. If you're a 6th round pick and you are still in the league, you're doing well for yourself from this point. And but these first 5 picks, if you look at it, they pick guys who are, except for Hurd, are all still on the team. I mean, you get 4 out of 5 guys who are serious contributors. I mean, big time contributors to this team. You get 4 out of 5 in a draft.
Yeah. This is the best draft.
This is the best draft.
I mean, it was phenomenal.
I would take this over 2 combined drafts from any other year.
I agree. I'm with John.
Yeah.
This is when the Niners figured it out. And it started when Arizona handed them Nick Bosa. Like, just like, yo, this is your guy. And I'm like, they stupid. Now, I knew Debo was the pick after the Senior Bowl. I don't know if y'all watched that Senior Bowl in 2019. I didn't attend that one.
Kyle was so in love with him after the Senior
and
Bowl.
love is not the word. I'm talking Kyle was buying him flowers. Like, this was the pick. Like, and he didn't even play the whole game. He got hurt. I was just like, whoa. Like, right? Kyle knew that was his guy. That he knew.
To quote Death Cab for Cutie, Kyle was seeing his reflection in his window, right, as he's walking outside his door or walking outside his house. So we got a super chat here and from Josh Alvarez. We got to get to it. He asked Breezie, he says, Breezie, your point scares me about stashing players. He says they didn't draft to play the players this year. The Chiefs draft to help this season. How do the 49ers realistically stack up against the Chiefs this season? I think the biggest scare, I think, moment that everyone in the league was like, you got to be freaking kidding me, was when the Chiefs traded up and nabbed Xavier Worthy. Because you're like, if there's any offense in this league who doesn't need an Xavier Worthy that would not be good for the rest of the league, it would be the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, and they freaking get him. Yeah. How do you feel about that? That's somebody who changes their offense this year. Do the 49ers, did they do anything to leapfrog, get to, we're not just an overtime away, that we're more than we can do more than a 10-point lead at some point in this game and actually close it out?
It's interesting that you said that. And Josh, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. So let me kind of help you with not being scared from the point that I made. And I said that they wouldn't, I never said that they didn't draft to play the players. I said start these players. Like, these players aren't meant to come in week 1 or whatever. Now, as far as them playing throughout the regular season, that all depends on how well they train, how well they practice. And don't get it twisted. Like, these are system fit players, and Kyle will look to get his coaches to get these players involved if they do well in practice. So I do see a Ricky Pearsall making a difference with the San Francisco 49ers, because if Adebo is not on the field, you don't have to change up your play calls, because now you got Ricky Pearsall who can play the X, the Y, and the Z. And so now he can run the ball out of the backfield. He can be your slot receiver. He can also be the guy that gets open with his route running. John did really good breakdown on his route running, right? And so man coverage is a little press man coverage, let me be specific, might be a little hinder in his game, but that doesn't mean he can't find a way to get open. Kyle can scheme guys to get open. So Pearsall's not the only one. They added the top element of speed. So no, they didn't get 4.2 speed, but they got speed out of Jacob Cowing, and they still have Danny Gray. And I know a lot of people don't think Danny Gray is going to make this roster, but what if he was the stash player? What if he was a player that was stashed? And that made me know that they weren't going to draft an Xavier Worthy, because Xavier Worthy can't even catch the ball in practice. I don't know if you've seen that film, but he's dropping passes. And so calling these people with great hands and decent amount of speed to take the top off the D. You got Jacob Cowing, you still got Danny Gray. So I think the San Francisco 49ers, I don't know how they're going to keep 11 wide receivers, because they're not, but it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Because I feel like even though Danny Gray may struggle in his route running and getting open, he can still burn the top of the defense. And if they add that element, which they were using when Trey Lance was here, and we've seen Brock can throw that ball down the field, we may be able to do that as well. Now, as far as stopping the Chiefs, we get physical with them on defense. And that's why they added a guy like Renardo Green and a Malik Mustafa and some of these young guys. So, yeah, they're going to play. As far as them starting, I mean, Jair Brown wouldn't have gotten the opportunity that he got unless the injury happened. So there's going to be opportunities for these kids to come in here and I think make a difference year 1, but they really won't come. The 2024 players won't come into their own until 2025.
Yeah.
I hope that helped them with that.
I think, too, the other part is, look, people say he was a scapegoat, but Steve Wilkes, there was not a good scheme cohesion there. There were scheme problems all year long. These players were not comfortable in this scheme. I felt like we were playing when we played in zone, we were having them drop a little bit too deep, and they're playing in too much space. We weren't matching up against the final number 3 well a lot of times, and it was causing Fred Warner to either be late or Dre Greenlaw to be running across the field for guys, or we were leaving our safeties in too much space on players out of the backfield, and we were just giving up too many yards. And then guys start trying to overcompensate, and they're bailing out of their zones early, and then you go and play man coverage, and you got Isaiah Oliver getting burned left and right, and it didn't work out really well there. It felt like this team, the talent on the defensive side of the ball overcame a lot of the scheme problems, and it really felt like that through the first 3 quarters or 2.5 quarters of the Super Bowl, and then it caught up with them. The last 2 drives of the Chiefs in that game that was some of the worst defensive play calling I have seen from a 49ers team in a long time. It was so frustrating. The Chiefs actually could have won that game outright. Well, like 4 plays before they did. They ran. It was a big third down they ran in overtime. They ended up getting the conversion. They actually had a player wide freaking open on the other side of the field for a touchdown because we busted the coverage. It was that bad. Patrick Mahomes, it wasn't like, oh, if we just stop that receiver. Actually, we failed to pick up both those guys on a play that Andy Reid won the Super Bowl on 3 years before. Like, he beat the 49ers with it. He beat the Eagles with it. It's like it's classic air raid Mississippi State mesh concept. I mean, just like Andy Reid has run this for years and years and years, and it's one of his staple plays. And it was so badly covered that Mahomes went to the number 1 in the progression because it was open. If he had forced to go to number 2, it would have been a touchdown. And we wouldn't even had to worry about that end of the game. Logan Ryan going, "Oh man, Andy Reid beat us there at the goal line." That I feel like if we can get back to what the scheme was, where it's more of a fit for our players, I think that there's a lot of potential for growth with the defense and more consistency with the defense. The defense was so inconsistent last year. I feel like that one gives you a step up too. I think Jacob Cowing is going to fit that role, that Santana Moss role from what was used to be the Redskins, right? With Shanahan. The Santana Moss was in that role. We brought in Marquise Goodwin to be that role. It didn't work out. Couldn't stay healthy. Brought in Danny Gray. That has not worked out. Can't get on the field. Jacob Cowing is that same sort of role. It was Taylor Gabriel with the Falcons, that small, blazing fast guy. I think this is now that latest attempt, and I like Cowing. I have some clips I'm going to be putting up on my members website, which is sponsored by Power Brand Systems. John knows them very well. They do his members web. They've done it for years. John, tell us what it is like working with Christian and Power Brand Systems.
Oh, they're the best. The one, they're diehard Niners. Huge Niner fans. Great community guys, and they build everything to whatever it is you want. Like, we do our Rush road trips, and we've always used ticketing sites. We're using them now, and they can build out a platform for whatever it is you want, whether it's membership, education, training, whatever it is you need for your business. They will help you, and they integrate everything into a very easy to use app. It's incredible. Power Brand Systems, off the charts, amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely love them. You know, they reached out to me because through John, and they helped build they built my members website. I didn't even have to give them very much. I said, look, this is kind of what I'm thinking, and they have such a great eye for design, for reach, for kind of curating your site towards what you do and your brand. Power Brand System, they're really well named because they will power up your brand. If you're a small business owner, it's not just for content creators. This is small business owners. This is anybody who's looking to expand your reach, give you one one-stop shop place, Power Brand Systems. You can visit powerbrandsystems.com/JonnyDel, and you can check them out. They're awesome. I love them. They are doing a phenomenal job on our end. One of the last super chats here, and we're going to get these guys out of here. They got to get running. Josh Alvarez, he was saying, let's not forget how good of a pick Borland could have been. He could have. That was a bulky pick, though. That was 2015.
2015, yeah.
Because he looked all world, and Patrick Willis said the emergence of Borland made him feel like he could retire. Right? He was sitting there saying, this kid emerged and he started playing out of his mind, and he reminded of me what I used to do before my feet started getting all messed up, and I didn't want to leave the 49ers hanging, but you know what? They got Borland, and he's somebody I can believe in.
I love Borland. He ran a 4.840. Like, these players don't exist in the NFL anymore. Like, I know he was great and he could have kept playing, but like, if you put Chris Borland next to Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner and like all the guys they draft, like, they're not the same humans. He was just pure instincts. He's a dinosaur already, which is crazy because he could still be playing. But and also, I got to give you credit for your Mike Leach reference earlier about the Mississippi State air raid. That made me very happy, Johnny.
That was dope.
Yes. Well, I mean, I always remember from Mike Leach, like, he would go into games and his like play sheet was literally almost like an index card. He only had like 8 plays, and And 3 of them were all based around the mesh concept. Like and it was so hard for teams to stop,
It doesn't
but
matter.
he was the
Oh,
guy
man,
who brought
it
yeah.
doesn't matter.
He was the guy who brought that to the NFL. I mean, every team in the NFL runs that. And that came from him. But it was so frustrating there. This has been really fun. We have got to do part 2, which we're going to look at the 2020 NFL 49ers draft. You start kind of seeing this same cycle go around where you have 2 really sus years, but you get a couple gems out of there, and then you have a really, really good draft that kind of helps you out, helps you make up for it. Hopefully we're not starting over that 2017 cycle again right now, 2017, 2020, and now hopefully 24 isn't the start of that cycle anymore. But it's also one thing to bear in mind too, is that some of these years you have to also take into account who they traded for with some of these picks. 2020 and 2019, they traded away a second rounder for D Ford. So, and that, while we got a 1-year wonder out of him for at least most of the year, made that was one of the best defensive lines to ever watch play. For they had a good 12 games there where that was so fun to watch, was with D Ford, Nick Bosa, DeForest Buckner, Armstead, just eating. So fun to watch. If you were to give a final grade for the 2019 draft, what would it be, John?
2000 A+. I mean, that's
A+.
You don't get better drafts than this. You don't.
Wayne?
Yeah, it's a solid A for me, man. Like they hit the nail on the head with that particular draft. And I like the players that ended up turning out to what they are. Man, they even hit the nail on the head with the damn punter. I didn't see that happening, but they got it right.
They absolutely did. And I will say, you know what? We can thank Jimmy Garoppolo for this 2019 draft, because if his ACL hadn't exploded, and even though we were so mad there,
you don't get
in that
Debo.
You don't
game,
get Nick, but yeah,
you don't get Nick Bosa, you don't get Debo, right? Those are high round picks. You aren't picking at the beginning of the round. If those things don't happen,
we're not coaching the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, we're not coaching the Senior Bowl. So I mean, people, let's remember Jimmy G with some kindness there in that one. That
the best thing he did for us
was
get injured. Yeah, that's what you're saying, Johnny.
You know what? His ACL was the best.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Us.
We appreciate you, dog.
I'm not throwing shade. I'm just saying that's hilarious.
It's funny because it's true. But look, he did really, the moment he walked into that quarterback room was a lot better. We had hot garbage in that quarterback room before Jimmy G walked in, and at that point it was just cold. So I'm kidding. Wow, that you guys just stared at me like that was brutal. Look, after the roast of Tom Brady last night and some of the things that
junk was funny,
bro.
No
I couldn't believe
no filters,
I couldn't believe
bro.
more than one person brought up Aaron Hernandez.
No, more than one. The whole every roaster, and even the coach.
They're making Aaron Hernandez jokes. I'm like, this has gotten to a dark place, man. I don't know about this one.
I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm in.
It was definitely entertaining. I will leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, so I'll just say this. It was Nikki Glazer got up there and she asked Randy Moss why he didn't have a ring. She's like, Randy, you don't have a ring. Why don't you got a ring? Even Aaron Hernandez got a ring around his neck. And it was.
Yeah, it was. Listen, first of all, it's a roast, so just be prepared for the worst, like of anything. Like it was only one time. I thought one time Tom Brady had to intervene and tell him don't say that stuff again. Now
because he made a Robert Kraft.
He made a Robert Kraft reference about the massage. He told that dude,
"Why
don't
can't
say
you make fun of that?" Why?
It was just the respect that he still had for Robert Kraft. I don't know. But you know what? He didn't make that joke again.
Yeah,
it's true. Nobody else did.
Well, that's good though. So hopefully the show had a happy ending then.
And we're out.
That's we gotta leave on that one. Stay tuned. Part 2 will be coming at some point. Love y'all. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and go Niners.